you might need to refer to the other 2 videos for different terms that are used as I go through these slides. I have to stop now because I think we should just start all over.
All right, fair enough.
I'm thinking, I have to stop now because there is no way I can move this slide without operating. So this is the 3rd video in our series of 3 videos about how you can use data to inform the development of just-in-time adaptive interventions in mobile health. This particular video is how we can analyze data resulting from a micro-randomized trial. And I'm going to describe the analyses or the types of analyses one can conduct in the context of a physical activity trial, in particular, heart steps. So heart steps is a series of 3 studies, the first of which is a micro-randomized trial. And the goal of the 3 studies is to develop a just-in-time adaptive intervention for individuals to become active and maintain that activity. So the first study, the one we're going to hear about today, was recruited individuals who are sedentary who had a full-time job. And each person had a band, a wearable, that would record their step count as well as the sleep quality. Also, the phone recorded the individual step count. So we had differing ways to record step count in this particular study. So one of the things we wanted to do in this study, we had a whole variety of interventions we were developing that would hopefully help people become more physically active. But in a particular interest was an intervention aimed at helping you be more active in the moment. And these were tailored activity messages. The activity messages were tailored to the time of the day of the week, whether you were at home or at work, and how good the weather was outside. And beside me, you'll see an example of one of these messages. What would happen is your phone would light up, it would audibly ping, and then in your notifications, you'd get a notification, which is a tailored message. This particular message arrived in the morning on a weekday, and the weather was pretty good. So you can see that it suggests that I go outside. As I said, each message was tailored to that moment in time. The question to ask is, should we provide a tailored message or should we not? Of course, our long-term goal in this series of studies is to help people achieve better levels of physical activity and maintain those levels of physical activity. So what were the decision points? Remember, we discussed decision points in the first video in the series of 3 videos. Here, originally, we thought that the decision points would be every minute. But then when we had access to large amounts of data from people who were wearing the wristband that measured step count, and we realized that when you looked at individuals' behavior, that people who had jobs, regular jobs, their greatest within-person variance in step count occurred around 1 of 5 times a day. And I've listed these 5 times: right before the morning commute, around lunchtime, mid-afternoon, right around the evening commute, and then post-dinner. Around 5 times, approximately 2 to 2.5 hours between each decision point. So that's the reason why we settled with these 5 decision points as opposed to every minute. It's because these were the times at which we saw high within-person variance in step count. Now, the intervention, as I discussed, is this tailored activity message. It's to help you be more active at that moment. So the approximate outcome is very proximal. That is, it's the step count over the subsequent 30 minutes, very near time. We were really interested in how, whether or not our activity messages were effective at helping people be more active, but also would the effectiveness of these messages deteriorate with time, decrease with time. Participants might become more burdened or by the intervention, they get tired of being notified, or they may just habituate to the message and just not even see it. So very tailored time and study was tailoring variable for us that we had pre-specified prior to this study. Another was prior activity level. So if I was very active prior to receiving to a decision point, would that influence how much I responded to an activity message? So we ran a micro-randomized trial. At each of those 5 times per day, we randomized whether to deliver tailored activity suggestion versus no delivery. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there were many other components of this intervention, but this is the component we're focusing on in today's video. Now, the study was it was 5 times a day an individual was randomized, and it was a 42-day study. So that meant every individual could be randomized up to 210 times. Our big question, does providing the tailored activity suggestion, does it increase your step count over the next 30 minutes versus not providing a message? And if so, does that effect deteriorate with time? So we're going to see how the data analyses went in this particular setting. How did we address these questions? So this was a pilot study. As I said, it was the first of 3 studies, and it's very small, only 37 participants. The main purpose was to assess feasibility of the application, to make sure the application was stable and so on. But nonetheless, we could practice the data analyses as well. So every day, we had to decide how to randomize whether or not one would get a message at each of those 5 times versus not get a message. So at each time, you could get a message versus not. And we wanted an average of 3 activity messages per day. There are 5 opportunities, 5 decision points. Thus, we chose a probability of 0.6 to provide a message, 0.4, don't do anything. So now how we conducted the study, 37 participants, and then we went to analyze the data. So here you see some conceptual models at the top of the screen. And think about each model. It is a conceptual model. That's why there's quotes connecting the why, the response, to the other parts of the model. So let's go through this. The outcome is, of course, we'd like it to be the step count in the succeeding 30 minutes, but we want, as is customary in activity studies, we used a log transformation. This will improve the accuracy of our confidence intervals. So the response, the why, is a log transform step count. The indicator of receiving a message versus not is AT, that is receiving a message at decision point T versus not. 1 if you got the message, 0 otherwise. Z is a variable which is your prior to that decision time activity level. And then D is a variable which indicates the length of time you've been in the study. D takes the value 0 on the first day of the study, the value 41 on the last day of the study. So let's look at that first analysis here. That's the top equation. Here we just wanted to see, we focus on the coefficient beta 0, and AT is an indicator treated versus not. Beta 0 will tell us, was there effect at all, on average across the study, of getting a message versus not? That's the very first thing we want to ask. Then, because we're so concerned about habituation and burden, the next question we want to ask is that effect of that message, does it change as the study progresses through time? So the next slide I'll show you is the results of these analyses. You can read about the analyses in one of the references at the end of this video. So here's again, I've just given you the exact same 2 equations at the top, and then I provide the results. Now, these results are on the log scale, so I have to interpret them, and I have to remember how to interpret them for you. So I have my cheat sheet. So the first result is for beta 0, that's the coefficient of AT, an indicator. AT is 1 if you got an activity message, 0 if you didn't. So beta 0 represents the average effect of an activity message over the entire duration of the study. It's on the log scale. It's 0.13, a little difficult to interpret, but I'll translate that for you. It represents a 13% increase in step count over the next 30 minutes compared to not getting a message. That's around 33 steps for this particular population. Then we went on and we said, wow, does that effect start to deteriorate with time? As I said earlier, we were really concerned about that. So we include DT, the indicator of day in study. DT is 0 the first day of the study, and then it increments till 41 on the last day of the study. Here we see, well, look, beta 0, that's the effect of the intervention. It's the estimator of the effect of the intervention very early in the study, 0.51. That represents a 67% increase in step count, which is around 170 steps. This is pretty good because on average, people in any 30-minute increment of time, people would get around 250 steps. So this is an incremental addition of 170 steps. Unfortunately, beta hat 1 is negative. It's very small, but it's exactly what we were worried about. The intervention deteriorates, the effect of the intervention deteriorates over time. Indeed, by 3 weeks into the study, around day 21, the effect had pretty much deteriorated. We were only seeing a 16% increase in step count if you got a message versus you didn't. So what's our summary for this particular small analysis? The data indicates that there's a causal effect of the activity suggestion on step count on the succeeding 30 minutes. Unfortunately, the effect deteriorates with time. Initially, the tailored activity suggestion increases step count over the succeeding 30 minutes by around 170 steps, but by 3 weeks in, it's only around 35 steps. This information has really helped us. We're now in the process of designing the second study in hard steps. And as a result, in terms of this, the activity suggestions will only provide activity suggestions for 2 weeks. Then the participant will have a vacation from activity suggestions for a week. That's precisely because of this decreasing effect. We're hoping the habituation will go away, and then in the 2 weeks after the vacation week, we'll get back in effect. A natural question that arises is, what kinds of analyses can one use to analyze data from a microrandomized study? And I showed you a method, data analyses from a method called the weighted and centered least squares analysis. And if you had talked to me, say 2 years ago, I would have been highly inclined to suggest that you use either generalized estimating equations or a multi-level model, also called random effects models. And the reason why is because these are the kinds of models that we commonly use in longitudinal data analysis. For example, if we're interested in understanding how stress and mood co-vary with time, that would be a natural setting in which we might use a random effects model. Or we might use even fancier models coming out of machine learning, sometimes called partially linear single index models, varying coefficient models. All of these might be used for longitudinal data to understand, for example, how stress and craving co-varies with time, stress and mood co-varies with time. However, these methods were not developed to conduct causal inference. And indeed, they can destroy the advantages of the microrandomization. And the reason why is that in order to increase the signal-to-noise ratio, to increase our ability to detect effects, these methods, they use future observations to determine the estimate of a coefficient at the present time. So they pool over time, both past and future, to determine an estimate or an estimator at a present time. If you're accustomed to causal inference, you know that the one thing you never want to do is use future data to inform the estimator or the estimate of an effect at a present time. That's how you destroy the effects of randomization and obtain bias. So as a result, we ended up having to develop this newer method, which I illustrated with you using hard steps. So thanks for watching. This is the last of the 3 videos on how one can use data to inform the development of just-in-time adaptive interventions. Along with this video, there are also references that you can find below the video. Thank you. Bye.